A lot of the time people think of groundwork as something that you do with your horse maybe when you don't want to ride, but really think of it as a way of communicating with our horse. Having company, horses are herd animals, so it's so important that we do offer that to them, to where they can interact and have that outside stimulus with other horses, because it is truly so amazing how much it can affect every other aspect of their lives. Setting up their environment, how can we do things that help the horse, because very rarely do horses don't wake up of a morning trying to think of how they could potentially maybe ruin their owner's day, as much as people try and convince me of it.
Welcome everyone to episode 141 of the Send Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan today, and today I have another very special guest to join me on our podcast, and it is Tiffanie Edwards, also known as the Horse Translator on social media. And Tiffanie runs an adjustment centre and clinics in the Jerry Plains in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. And Tiffanie has a wealth of experience with horses since a young age and prides herself on that holistic approach to horse care and management, but also with her clients, bringing them closer to their horsemanship journey by building confidence in and out of the saddle and maintaining or promoting a stronger partnership with their horse. So the theme of this podcast is helping horses thrive and the link with the groundwork, wellness and nutrition. This is going to be a really good insight from Tiffany's point of view and the experience that she has and the success she has with her clients' horses. How are you, Tiffanie?
Yeah, thank you. And it's really exciting to be here.
First, Tiffanie, I'd like to take the listeners through your journey into horsemanship. And as I understand, you grew up from a non-horsey family like myself, and how you found your way with horses?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of came into horses from a non-horsey family. Traditionally, you'd probably think that someone with where I've gone with horses would have came from a horsey background, but neither mum or dad were into horses. But I always felt like I found a deep comfort with the horses, and to find a way to relate to them that was able to help myself also. So coming through school, I had quite a lot of trouble fitting in and also being able to do well in that more textbook sort of space. Yeah, I had a lot of trouble through that, and I guess that also helped me find a fair bit of empathy for the horse and maybe the struggles they have throughout their education.
And has that shaped your empathy and training approach with horses?
Yeah, I think when you've had sort of certain struggles yourself, you're able to look at things through a different lens, from a different point of view, and to be able to understand probably where another being is coming from. I guess my first horse I got when I was about 12, and always had a huge love for horses, but was never able to kind of have one myself. I was able to hang around different people with other horses, but it wasn't something that was accessible to me till I was of an age where I could sort of try and save up and to make that happen for myself. I purchased my first horse, and probably like some other people's experiences, he was probably the most far from what would really be suitable for me at the time. He was a big Appaloosa quarter horse gelding that hadn't had the best start, and he kind of came into my care, and I guess I had to learn pretty quick and find my feet pretty quick, because I had this horse that needed a lot of help and had a lot of struggles, and from the on the ground to under saddle to trailer loading. And he was a very much so a big push in having to find my feet fairly quick, but also try and see it from the horse's point of view, because this particular horse had been through a lot of hands and had experienced probably a fair bit too along the way. So it was a matter of helping him to be to where we were able to communicate as a better partnership. And he was really the vehicle that sort of pushed me in this direction, because there probably wasn't anywhere to sit and hide from where I needed to help him. He needed support, and it was a matter of being there for him and to be able to look into myself and to see how I could help him through that.
Yeah, and then what age did you decide to see this as like a profession in terms of horse education?
Yeah, so when I was almost 16, I finished school. So I dropped out of school in year 10. I had a lot of struggles with dyslexia and not being able to really fit, I guess, mainstream learning. I've always had a very different perspective and way of looking at things and a different way of learning, and it definitely wasn't from in a book. I tend to learn better from life experiences and to be able to be out in the field. So once I kind of got through year 10, I didn't even get my school certificate. I dropped out of school and then I went to ag college, and that was sort of a place for me to find something that I was interested in. I always really loved horses, and I always knew I wanted to sort of be a horse educator, but how I was going to make that happen, I didn't know. So I went off to ag college for 2 years, went off and worked in different situations, and I went on one of the work experiences to a property in Goulburn on a property that did prime lamb and also beef cattle. And I was there for about a month. And we were sitting around a table with one of the managers, him and his wife. And I remember his name was Dave, or they used to call him Macca. And we're sitting around, and there was a horse trainer on this particular property also. And I remember I used to be getting around on the quad or on the bike, and we were moving cattle or whatever. And I used to always be like, oh, man, I'd really love to do something like that one day. I was talking to Macca, I think, and his wife. They were sort of going around asking us what we wanted to do after college. And I said, I'd really love to be a horse educator, but I just don't know whether I've got it to do it. And they said, well, you don't know unless you try. And I don't know what it was about hearing that from someone that wasn't probably immediate family or someone that knew me in a lot of depth, but it was enough for me to feel like someone could see something in me. And so that was enough for me to go home. And Mum and Dad had just purchased the property out at Duralong on the Central Coast, and I went back home and I sort of started to hit the ground running. So it started taking horses in for educating and training and handling, and started off with one, and then it sort of grew from there.
Yeah, and then to your current situation now with intake of client horses, if you want to describe that side of the business now, like come full circle to the current day?
At 17, I started working for the public after years of helping friends with their horses, and started starting horses under saddle, educating and helping horses in troubled situations, from the trailer loading to out on the trail and beyond. And it's really become a really significant passion in my life. Been a interesting journey in development. You know, it's amazing how you develop over the years and how you sort of continue to develop as a person and a horse person. So now we're in Jerry Plains. So we're in the Jerry Plains, Hunter Valley. I'm still working with clients' horses. So from starting under saddle to educating, a lot of lessons, clinics. It's amazing. We're on 148 acres, and we offer long and short-term spelling for horses. So being able to help horses that maybe need a place to retire, or young horses that need to grow out, or maybe just a place for horses to come to spell that, you know, their current situation isn't able to provide them, and they come out to where we are. And I like to think of it as a sort of holistic approach, putting the horse first and making sure that we're able to meet their needs. So a lot of our paddocks are 10 acres, so they're quite big, and we do offer private and herd options, and I try and put them in compatible herds with horses that are going to be beneficial to one another. That's ideally how I would like for them to be, and yeah, it's a really beautiful, special place that we're at.
The videos I've seen online, I think it's a very peaceful and nice place for a horse to live. What would the most common types of horses that come to you normally? Yeah, so
I guess it's kind of interesting over the years, I guess, how I look from my exterior, you know, cowboy hat, jeans, how I dress, you would sort of assume that I'd have a lot more your performance Western discipline styled horses, but probably the most type of horses I've had over the years would have to be warm bloods and maybe your Arabians and stuff like that. But I've had so many different types of horses over the years, from your Highland ponies to your gypsy cobs to your ponies, your drafts, your shires, your quarter horses, and a bit of everything in between. What's been really good, because the Sen's really been able to really cater for a huge variety of horses of all different ages and breeds, and really able to support them, especially when you're going from your fell ponies to your thoroughbreds. They're a very different end of the spectrum, but it's been so nice with having a simple feed routine that I'm able to support them all around the board, and it not be overcomplicated. It's really, really lovely.
Yeah, and I think that's how we connect originally, Tiffanie. I think it's been way back, and I would probably call you an OG Sen supporter in terms of how we introduced to our products back in the day.
Yeah, I remember from the original, I think it was did you have like a pulp, like a beet pulpy sort of product? Yeah.
Some people might not know that we actually had a beet pulp product way back in the day in that product development with the Sen oil as well.
Yeah. I remember way back then, and then when the grain-free came along, and then the lupin pellet, and then now the ultimate. And I found like the development of the feed, and that's such a great thing I find with Sen, is the development with the feed, it only ever gets better. Like I'm finding now with the ultimate, it's, more palatable than ever. Like I had a 6-month-old colt arrive to our place the other week, and he's been on, from what I can tell, quite a more sugar starch diet, and he gobbled it up straight away. There was sort of no worries with the palatability, what you might find sometimes when you're going from one extreme to the other in the types of feed that they're having. But yeah, it's so nice to know that I've got a feed that I can trust. That's easy. You don't have to be a scientist to know how to mix it, how to do it. It's simple enough that my husband, if I needed a hand doing it, he knows how to do it. Because that's the thing, you don't want to spend all your day mixing up feeds, or every minute of every day worrying about what sort of feed am I feeding my horse? Is it right? Because Sen's, taking care of all that. You can ring up, you can have a consult, you can know exactly what it is. And then over time, as things change, as your horse might develop, or, as they grow, or maybe as they age, or as their workload fluctuates, you're able to call them and check back in. It just leaves all the guesswork out. And I think that's what I like. And then also having it from, keeping on that holistic approach of managing horses in the most natural way, making sure that we have all their forage and everything met, and then filling in the shortfalls. It really just makes for a really nice diet that can support every horse in any stage of their lives.
No, 100% echo your thoughts in terms of where we come from at Sen with the mantra of feeding according to their physiology, having that roughage or hay amount first, or pasture. And that holistic approach to nutrition, what we find is, and we'll discuss this now, that there's full links between quality nutrition and it being the center of horse education and what they need to thrive. So we'll touch on how a well-fed horse is easier to train and is more willing to learn. If you want to elaborate on this.
I think people can relate to that too. It's, if we're not feeding ourselves correctly, looking after ourselves correctly, it's very hard to do well in our chosen job or hobby or whatever that might be. If you're not feeding yourself well to where you're feeling lethargic, bloated, you might have sort of stomach issues. It's very, very hard to have an open mind to where it's easy to take in information, because that brain and gut connection is so apparent, and it's the same with our horses. So I feel like a lot of horses that maybe have what people would describe as behavioural problems are a lot of the times horses that just aren't having a quality diet to where they are thriving, to where they are feeling good from the inside out, because it's no different to us. If we're not feeling good within ourselves, it's hard to be able to show up the same way you would like to. So over the years, I've had a lot of horses come in that people say have behavioural issues, And it's amazing by the time I work with them, and obviously there's the education side of things, but also having them on a quality diet to where they have full access to roughage. And I've had many different ends of the spectrum throughout my career over the years. I've been on the Central Coast where you've got lots of kikuyu and paspalum, and it's, it looks lovely, but there's not a lot of nutritional content in that. And then I've also been in Lower Belford in the Hunter Valley to where it was quite harsh climate, so quite hard ground, not a lot of feed about. And then to where I am now where, I've got abundance of feed of lots of native grasses. So I've been in a lot of different situations, and I think, sometimes people feel like they aren't able to manage it in a way for their horse, but there definitely is. It's just about coming up with solutions. Like, for example, at Lower Belford, we had hay feeders with roofs. Each horse had one of them, and I would fill it up with Rhodes grass, and it was constantly there, constantly full. They had access to it. And that was so important, because if you've got a horse that's, spending 24 hours of their day waiting for their little bit of hay morning and night, there's a big chunk of that day where they're standing around not eating feed, where that acid building up to where you're causing problems to the gut, to where if you can have that constant access to roughage, it's important. It's about adjusting it to your circumstances and to your conditions that you have available to you. But yeah, I've had many situations where I've had to adjust and adapt to the situations, and yeah, having that constant roughage is so important, because if you don't have that, what really is the foundation, that's what horses are made to do, is to be able to graze constantly and also travel ground. They might travel kilometres a day to get to water and feed. And to be able to bring that into our way of them living now is so important, to be able to replicate that in more of their domestic environment.
Yeah, you speak our language, Tiffanie, in terms of when we look at diet consults that we do, but also really early on, Sen came into the industry and identified that we have to center things around the hindgut, especially of the horse. We know research around that gut-brain axis, their microbiome and the horse's central nervous system, they communicate, and that is the mechanism that is called the gut-brain axis, and they send signals between each other. So as Tiffanie touched on before, if that horse's hindgut is not in a balanced state with good bacteria, all that fiber fermentation from the roughage going in, then this gut-brain axis balance is out, and there's not those good feelings going to the brain, which is really going to hinder the horse from moving forward in their development with training and their willingness to learn. And the research in the last few years on this is very strong, that getting that hindgut health, especially with that roughage source, we're a feed company and we're promoting grassy hay or that ad lib pasture access or hay access is the foundation. And what we're really doing with the hard feed side with the Sen Grain Free Ultimate or the Sen CA50 is balancing those nutrient shortfalls within the diet for the horse's body systems to thrive. And I think, Tiffanie, you've witnessed that firsthand, the effect that with our quality ingredients that we use in our products.
Oh, definitely. And I think, it's not like I've just had one or two horses on the products. I wouldn't even be able to tell you how many horses over the years have, come along and been on the products. And one thing I've always pride myself on is horses leaving looking better than when they came. It means the world to me. I love seeing horses thriving. I love seeing horses doing well and leaving well, and also getting those compliments off the owners on how they look. It's a real credit to Sen and what they've been able to provide, because it makes my life a lot easier. And also being able to have it to where, you have the CS50 and the Ultimate, to where I can cater to a large variety of horses, and I only need the 2 bags of feed. And then I've got my supplements. So I've got my salt, my electrolytes, and then extra balance, what I use a lot when horses are coming to the property, because they've come from maybe they've travelled a fair way, like a horse on the weekend travelled, I think it was about 5 hours to get to me, and then also the stress sometimes of horses travelling if they're going on transport and stuff, and then, the different types of grasses that they're coming to. It's really nice to be able to support them throughout that first period as they're starting to adjust with the extra balance, to be able to make sure that their gut has been supported to the best way we can. And then also with the electrolytes, especially if they're going on, sometimes when horses get picked up from my centre, they might be going via transport. I'll always give them some electrolytes before they hit the road, just to make sure that I'm doing and covering them as best as I can, so their journey is as smooth as possible.
Yeah, we're totally on the same wavelength with this, Tiffanie. And I think before we jumped on today and we had a quick chat before, I think, was it Sen Oil that was the first introduction to your place through a client? Is that?
Yeah, it was when I was on the Central Coast in Duralong. I had a horse called Charlie come, and that was sort of back in the day where owners would supply certain things, and he came with the Sen Oil, and that was one thing that I noticed about him, was just his beautiful coat that he had. But yeah, I fed it to him while he was with me, and it was amazing how it supported his coat, but just his overall condition. And then I sort of looked into it, and by the time he left, I'd already put all my own onto it. Yeah. and it's been a bit of a staple sort of ever since.
Yeah, and we pride ourselves on that quality in terms of, in this industry, there's a lot of non-regulation in terms of claims that have been made. And in recent years, we've had to really give our users or our clients and the public the safety measures and certifications that we go through for a product, and the yearly audits, just to make sure that what you are buying is what is inside the bottle. And even with the new Faber Bean base, which has been out over 6 months now, that switch was an innovation to help it be more sustainable, but then also to benefit the horse's body systems better than what was previously offered in the Lupin Bean base. And there was a podcast in a previous episode to this that we explained the whole evolvement, because originally Sen did have a soy-based pellet right back at the start, and that's just due to those ingredient restrictions back, that's probably 9 or 10 years ago. So as Tiffanie said, we innovate for a reason, and it all centers around the horse's health and their physiology, and then we work forward with that supply chain of ingredients to make it sustainable and at a sustainable price, because that's the last thing we want to do, is not be affordable, but also keep that quality of that ingredients really high.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting topic, because a lot of the time people will say, it's quite an expensive feed. But when you look at how much you need to feed your horses, like, for example, my personal horses might get a kilo of the ultimate, and, they'll get that once a day. Opposed to if you were to feed another feed, that if you were going to read and follow the back of the bag, you might need to feed between 2 and 4 kilos. So it might be, the bag might be cheaper, but at the end of the day, you're buying a lot more in. Especially if you've got multiple horses like we have, you have to store that feed. You have to go and get that feed. It's not just more expensive, but there's a lot more time put into having to do that, as opposed to Sen, where I'm able to buy 1 bag of feed, including or 2 if you include the CF50, that I'm able to store more of it in a smaller space and be able to get it from my stock feed, and I'm not having to feed near as much, because again, our horses' stomachs are so small, they're not really capable of being able to have that 4 kilos of hard feed and also have all that roughage that we want them to be eating.
Yeah, we identified that issue in the industry of too much hard feed and not enough roughage. And when you think about a horse, they need to really spend up to that 17 hours a day grazing for their natural digestive movement, especially through that whole hindgut environment. And if that's not met per day, you do run the risk of other conditions like colic and digestive upsets. But when we look at our volume, as Tiffanie says, is lower than the other feeds out there, then it's not filling them up with these empty calories for them not to then eat the amount of roughage required per day. So really having that balance of hard feed and roughage volume is really important for a horse to to ultimately thrive in what their required workload or what they're trying to do, or mend from a specific condition if they're recovering. But that could be a good segue to our next part of this podcast, which is we'll talk about how the horse's manure or their poo says about their health, and we can reflect on, does that show the digestion and nutritional balance that's going in from your experience, Tiffanie?
Yeah, and I guess I have like a really good horse to talk about that will cover this. If most people know me, they'll know of my horse Cole, my quarter horse gelding. And when I purchased him as a 2-year-old, I purchased him out of Tamworth or near Tamworth. When I picked him up, he had this terrible manure. He's not, I would by no means say he's a stressy horse. He did, how I kind of came across him was because there was certain things that he was having trouble with that was kind of concerning to some people. But when I got Cole, he came out of the drought. So he was born in the drought. I don't think he had a lot of access to forage because of that drought. So I think there was potentially, as his mother was carrying him, I think she probably lacked a fair bit of nutrition. And when he landed and hit the ground, he didn't have that constant pick. And pretty much from when I got him and when I picked him up from Tamworth and bringing him home that day, he had just the most shocking manure, almost like water. And he was like that for a little while. It was awful to see because I could imagine, us as people don't do very well when we're feeling that way. And I got him back to my place and I put him on lots of forage, so lots of free access to hay, and then started to put him onto the sen. And it took a little bit purely because I think there was so much damage done to his gut. But, the horse I have now that never has bad poos is just such a difference. What's a testament, he'll have the extra balance. Sometimes when we're getting a little bit of rain or change of seasons, I'll put him back on it. But now he's just on the ultimate, and he gets the gold, the salt and the oil. And he's in a 10-acre paddock and he's just thriving. But, the amount of horses that do come through my place, and you can tell when a horse isn't well because you can tell by the manure. Sometimes even the smell of it's just awful. You can tell that, they're not getting fed a quality diet, or they're getting lots of grain or very, very little feed. Because I think there's also a general consensus that people feel that, I don't want to feed my horse very much or maybe a quality diet because I'm scared that they might get hot. And I think sometimes we get confused with horses feeling hot and horses feeling like horses. Yeah. You see it all the time that people will say, I tried feeding my horse that, and then, they became uncontrollable, or as some people will say, they became really difficult. And sometimes, very, very rarely, if your horse has been fed a quality diet like sen, is that going to be the case? A lot of the time that can come back to educational reasons. So often the feed gets the blame, but a lot of the time some horses are living in such a state of sort of pushing through that they're not thriving from the inside. They're not feeling well. And that's the thing. I want my horse to feel good because then we're able to work well together. I think sometimes we think that a dull horse is a safe horse. But to me, a dull horse and a reactive horse are sort of in the same category. I want a horse to where they feel good and they're able to be responsive to me. We're able to have a conversation. We're able to build a partnership. And that's the thing. We want to be able to meet all those targets to where they are feeling their best. Otherwise, you end up going down the road and you end up having way more problems. And that's where I think, nutrition is not one of those things you can skip. No more than, you can skip farrier visits and those sorts of things. I think feeding is probably one of the things that people will try and save on, but you're not saving long term. You're not saving, down the track, because when I have my horses, I look at them to where, I would like them in there, feeling well and still being able to have that partnership with them into their, late 20s, longer if I could. So I'm looking at the long term and how I can support them. It's no different to supporting ourselves. Hopefully we're looking at the long distance to where we want to be healthy in our 80s. We're not just thinking, if I can make it to 50, that would be good. We're looking long term on how we can support ourselves, and it's just no different than with our horses.
100% agree, Tiffanie. When we hit our foundation goals in terms of that nutrient profile that is balanced from that roughage to the hard feed, and especially with our sen profile of a really good trace mineral profile that's not overloaded with iron, has really good quality zinc, copper, manganese especially. Combine that with the marine calcium and magnesium and the good antioxidants within the horse in terms of the vitamin E and the vitamin C, and also the macronutrient profile in terms of your protein, fat, and fiber content going in. We're looking also with the sugar and starch levels not being too low, but not being overloaded like a grain. When you have all this in balance and supporting every body system, one thing that horse owners should be aware of is if this is unbalanced, then some body systems will thrive, like the skin and coat, but then you might see an issue with their hoof health, because a lot of these minerals or trace minerals like zinc and copper are used everywhere throughout the body. And if you're not hitting those targets per day, you do run the risk of that chronic deficiency, unfortunately. And Sen has made this a lot more simple in terms of our product development and our ingredient quality being at a level where you will hit those targets depending on the volume, the condition of your horse, the workload, and their genetics and how they respond, whether that being an easy keeper or a hard keeper. But that brings us on to our next topic of the optimal development and health of a growing horse and the key nutrients we need for these younger horses that to develop those strong bones, muscles, and joints. And Tiffanie, I'll let you take the stage now and have your 2 cents worth in this side.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to young horse development, I feel like sometimes people they start to, even with education, they start to think about doing something once the horse is of an age to start, but they might not necessarily think about those years prior. And having steady, good nutrition throughout those younger years to where we're able to support them really does make such a difference come, when they're teens and going into their later years. But being able to have that free access forage, and also, and I'm a big believer in having that space for them to be able to grow and move. I think so often horses that have behavioural issues, they think it stems from just the horse having behavioural issues, but a lot of the time it comes down to how they're living. So, how is their living environment? Are they living in isolation, or are they living in a herd, with a herd of horses? I think so often a lot of those behavioural issues start from horses living in isolation, and being able to have horses in compatible herds to where they're able to cover ground and they're able to interact with each other is so important to the overall development, physically, mentally, and emotionally, because it really does help them with that development. Because a lot of the time, those horses that are in isolation, they're spending 24 hours a day maybe standing in the corner of their paddock. And for young horses, it's just not sustainable to have them like that for a long period of time and then not sort of thinking that it's going to affect them in their later years. And so that's one thing I've been super passionate about since we've moved out to Jerry's Plains, and we've got so much more space than what we did have at Lower Belford. And that was, another big reason behind why we did move to Belford, because I really wanted to be able to offer that to my horses. And with, that 148 acres, it just, it opens up so many more windows. So, at my place at the moment, we've got 10-acre paddocks. And I've been running horses in compatible groups. And a lot of people go, well, what do you mean by compatible? Compatible herd grazing. It really is just that, putting horses in compatible groups that is going to help each other thrive. So like I've got a few younger horses in at the moment, and they're out with my geldings. And, my geldings display behaviours and traits that are really desirable to me. And they're quite confident in themselves. And putting those younger horses with them is only going to help them with their development long term, because as they're getting around the paddock and as, different things are happening, say maybe cattle are moving by or, there's stuff happening, in the area, and they see, they might kind of get maybe a little bit of a startle by something, and then they look to my horses for support. And if they kind of say, well, you're all right, so I must be okay. And so they build confidence. And I think that's so important it's no different to us, the people we hang around. I'm a big believer in the people you hang around are either going to put you 5 years ahead or 5 years behind. And it's very similar with the horses, I think. What the environments that you put your young horses in is only going to affect them long term. So with this younger colt, he's out with my geldings at the moment, and he's just doing so well. It's about putting horses in compatible groups. I've got another mare that came to my property that is quite an anxious, sort of on edge mare, little stock horse, and I've put her with my husband's gelding. That's just he's just the most confident guy out, and just the way her demeanour and everything has changed because of that environment. And that's where having and being aware of the environment that your horse is in and how that's going to affect them long term is just so important. And with those young horses, giving them that free access roughage. What I'm very blessed in my situation to have, really good quality paddocks with quality feed, making sure that nothing's ever kind of getting, grazed down too low, putting them, rotating them into different paddocks, but also having that different landscape. So, there's a bit of flat and it goes up a hill and there's a dam down the bottom. So they've kind of got to travel quite a distance too. What's so important to their bones, their tendons, their feet, traveling that ground, what they were naturally doing well before we put them in, say acre paddocks, to where they're traveling. And, they've also got that outside stimulus, but they've also got that conditioning and they're building that muscle and they're able to use themselves in a way that's positive for the long term.
I 100% echo your thoughts, Tiffanie. I think you've really nailed this side on how the environment really influences a horse, and particularly those younger horses growing up. And this is confirmed by science. And I think there's 2 points that I want to cover off here, and what we have observed when we visit farms and we consult a lot of studs that, yes, you've got the necessary nutrients for bone development in particular for these younger horses. But if you don't have the right environment in terms of maybe a bigger paddock that is a little bit more undulating with hills, or having that challenge or that concussion on the bone growth and development, if you don't have that, all the nutrition in the world is not going to help that bone strength unless it's put under a little bit of pressure when they're younger. And that helps, and that comes naturally with the size of the paddock or the environment and how the various degrees and how much movement they get as a younger horse. But then the other aspect of this is equine epigenetics, and this is the studies of how environmental factors like the nutrition and training, but these can influence gene expression in horses without altering their DNA sequence. So this impacts traits like coat color, performance, and behavior. But as Tiffanie said, environmental factors also play a role, because this can be exposure to toxins, the climate conditions, other things in terms of the horse's overall health and adaptability. And these changes and the research going on is for a younger horse to really progress to full maturity, which is around that growth plate when they fuse around, I think it's 5 and 6 years old, for them to be at their prime and proper structure to really avoid injury later on in life, depending on what their chosen job to do or their discipline to do. It's a really understated thing in terms of when you do buy a horse or a younger horse from a farm, to know how they're being brought up and that there's no shortcuts being taken. And I think it's an underrated impact and things we have to look at. And that's only talking about the structural side. When you look at the metabolic side of a younger horse, it's like a human being exposed to a lot of sugar and starches at a younger age. Are they more predisposed to develop these diabetic or metabolic conditions? And you can really see this with a horse in terms of the way they can process sugars and starches later on in life from when they were a younger horse. And if we don't identify that, then how do we progress with their management later on? And I can see how horse owners can be confused when their horse develops those metabolic conditions and they look into their nutrition and the hidden ingredients or the confusion in the market with feeding, how they have come and consulted Sen or even other companies just to help lower or keep that balance of sugar and starch and the other macronutrients to help that horse thrive.
And I think Cole, like I was saying about my gelding, he's put such a influence on that, because I truly believe if his nutrition was different and how he was managed as a much younger horse before I got him, he wouldn't have had those struggles with his digestion and with his manure and just all those things, because his hoof quality, it would have been on a better track, and he wouldn't have had to go through those those depletes in minerals and maybe sort of being then going from having a lot to nothing. It would have been much more consistent. And I think that's the biggest thing, is having consistent nutrition throughout those young horses' lives, or throughout the horse's whole life, to where it's just a steady plane, to where then the horses can develop to the best of their abilities and thrive the way that they're intended to.
Yeah, 100% agree, Tiffanie. And it gave me a little bit of a thought then, in terms of, I work with a lot of off-the-track thoroughbred horse owners and trainers, and one thing that did struck me about that industry is sometimes these horses have to relearn how to eat hay because they've been restricted in the racing stables. And that's not to paint a picture with all race trainers, but in the past it has been well known that they do restrict hay intake because there's all these wives' tales around that they're going to get grassy bellies and everything like that. That's to do with the poor fiber quality in the hay. But we are reteaching or making the trainers unlearn this and say, this grassy hay is so vital for their systems and their hindgut. If the hindgut is not right, they're not going to perform to their ability. But going back on the off-the-track thoroughbred, depending on the trainer that they come from, these horses take months to even a year to relearn how to eat hay, which is quite shocking to think about when that's what they are physiologically built to do. And I just think with more awareness and more education, which is happening in the recent years on all conditions such as ulcers as well, I think hopefully horses can have a better life in the future with a more informed owner and trainer.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we get back to what nature intended for these animals and what's natural for them. The biggest things is having full access to roughage, having company. Horses are herd animals, so it's so important that we do offer that to them, to where they can interact and have that outside stimulus with other horses, because it is truly so amazing how much it can affect every other aspect of their lives. So many horses that have come to me throughout the years, I could tell you before I even did too much with them, I can tell a horse that has had healthy turnout and horses that have really lived in more isolation. Yeah, it's shocking how much it does affect them long term. And I think a lot of people get worried about, their horses getting injured or hurt. And I think there's more chances of that happening through restricted turnout from a very young age than there actually is from turnout. And by saying that, that's not saying don't turn your horses out with whatever. And that's where it comes back to putting them in compatible herds. But it's so important. It's no different to, a prime example would be through COVID, where everyone couldn't interact and do the things that they normally did. It really affected a lot of people mentally, with their mental health and so on and so forth. And our horses live like that a lot, purely because it's more convenient sometimes. And also, there's not a lot of other options. And that's where some people use my place, especially through Sydney or, your Central Coast, where they don't maybe have those options to have those big turnouts, as horses come to my place and they'll turn out over that period. I've been doing that sort of, even when I was on the Central Coast, I used to do that for people that their horses used to come and turn out and spell at my place, because they just didn't have that option. But it was amazing how many horses over the years that in particular, they would come out of Sydney, and I would always have them come for about a week or two prior to when I was going to start working with them and turn out in one of my paddocks, because a lot of the time they were in a stall or they were in a small yard. They never had a lot of room to move and stuff, and a lot of the behavioural issues that the owners were encountering really was directed to their living circumstances and their feeding and their management. And sometimes it is, changing the whole picture. I think sometimes we want to have all the miracles put into our hands and, you do this, you do that. And we're looking for that golden ticket, that technique or that piece of gear. And a lot of the time it has nothing to do with that at all. I always think horses are the best vehicle to self-development. And a lot of the times it comes, with our horses. They're the best vehicle for development and change. And it starts with us, how can we change how we're showing up? How can we change how we're setting up their environment? How can we do things that helps the horse? Because very rarely the horses don't wake up of a morning trying to think of how they could potentially maybe ruin their owner's day, as much as people try and convince me of it. Horses are always doing the best they can with the information provided and also the environment that they're set in.
Yeah, and again, Tiffanie, I 100% agree and echo all those thoughts, because it is getting back to nature. Nature knows best. And when we touched on just before that, yes, you can have your nutrition, you can have your environment and have that overall wellness, there's another aspect for a horse to thrive, and that's the Groundwork's role in their physical, emotional, and educational development. And yeah, I'll just let you elaborate on the physical and emotional benefits that plays.
Yeah, and I feel like Groundwork or horsemanship or whatever people would like to call it, a lot of people, I feel like horsemanship's almost like people put it in its own discipline. And so often it's put in a category that is almost on its own, like horsemanship, dressage, jumping, so on and so forth. But for me, a lot of people will say, do you do natural horsemanship? Or what do you do? And I always say, I just do good horsemanship, because I don't really believe in all the labels and terms that it gets. The biggest thing I'm trying to get back to is to be able to help the horse, to be able to communicate with them in a way that they understand and that feels good to them and us. A lot of the time people think of Groundwork as something that you do with your horse maybe when you don't want to ride, but really think of it as a way of communicating with our horse. For me to be able to start a horse, I need to have all those fundamentals operating well for me. It's a way of communicating with my horse, to be able to help them through certain areas of their lives, to be able to help them feel confident in their body and also physically, mentally and emotionally. And it's a way of me to be able to communicate and build bridges in between things to where they are able to understand what I'm looking for. So I think so often Groundwork's one of those things kind of looked over. People don't really kind of tend to worry about it so much, and I really try and put emphasis on the fact that it is a communication tool to be able to respond with our horses, and it goes into all aspects. I need that to be able to handle my horses, start my horses on the saddle, further educating, and more than anything too, you need it for trailer loading. And once you can get all those things operating well, to where your horse is operating on a feel, to where you're having a conversation with your horse. The way I work with horses, it's not about making a horse doing something. It's about setting it up and helping them find the answers. It's no different to how we learn. And I think that's where I struggled a lot through school, is I was trying to get made to fit in the box, but fit in the mainstream box with what needed to happen, as opposed to looking at it in a way that supported my development and my way of learning. And that's the thing, no two horses are the same, and how we go about educating them is the same. We treat them on an individual basis, and that's why throughout my years, I've never had, maybe like some trainers, I've never had anyone working for me. It's always just been me. It's been me from feeding to picking up yards to saddling to first rides. I think a lot of people seem to think I have someone do first rides on horses. I do the whole lot, and I've been very particular about making sure that it was just me, I'd rather have a waiting list than having people working for me, because there's not the same feel, intention, empathy there that it's hard to recreate that in someone else. And I really liked being able to do that. I think of it as a real personal thing with the horses, and I'm really invested in, giving those horses the very best education that they can that's going to last them throughout their lifetime. Because I think so often, especially with starting, a pretty sort of general consensus, people seem to think you send your horse off to get started and then you send him off somewhere else to get educated. But to me, starting is, the starting might be the first ride. That's the start. And every other ride after that, I'm educating, I'm helping develop him. And when I'm developing that horse, I'm trying to develop them into a confident, willing horse to where they want to have a conversation. They want to be a part of that partnership. It's a real consensus-driven approach, and really putting the horse first to where, you are trying to create a partnership and to where it feels good to them. And, I think over the years, I've seen so many different horses, especially, some people go, what's the hardest part? I always think starting a horse is a lot, I don't know whether you'd say it's a lot easier than having to re-educate something, because then you're having to sort of change preconceived ideas, and it extends all the way down into the body, how they use their body, how they biomechanically work themselves. Are they holding tension? Are they able to know how to release things? And that's where a lot of horses, they might go through their whole lives having been branded as, a problem horse, a horse that's hard to load, a horse that bucks, a horse that does all these different things that can be undesirable. But I always say to people, behaviour is communication. They're trying to communicate to us something. And sometimes that can be pain. Sometimes that can be stored up memory of like trauma. There's so many avenues, and sometimes it can be discomfort, like your horse could be having gastric problems, and there's so many different avenues. But I think if we can always kind of come to the horse in a way that is trying to support their development and help them thrive the best way they can, it's so important. But it starts all from that groundwork and having things to where the horse understands what we're looking for. And so often, I'll have horses come in for starting, and I've had horses ranging from 3 to, I think the oldest horse I started a few years back was 16 years old. So he wasn't a spring chicken. So very often it's lovely when I do get some that have had like a solid foundation at the start, but so often they're missing those fundamentals that could have been put in place from yearlings, really. Having them to where they're engaging because they want to, not because they have to, but creating that connection, creating that support, that draw to where you're creating a partnership. I think that's the biggest thing at the end of the day. I couldn't care how well I did in the competition with my horse if there wasn't that connection to where there was that partnership, to where it felt like we were doing it together. I wouldn't be interested in it.
No wonder you're a Sen ambassador and an original one as well, because our thoughts and mantra about horses is so aligned with that individualness, or treating every horse as an individual, including their nutrition, and as you've just outlined, looking at how they respond to their behavior and that groundwork. And really, when we look at our nutrition landscape, that's why we offer those free diet consults, because not every horse is the same, and you shouldn't look at your friend's horse for advice to what you should feed. You should look within your own horse and their responses and who they are, because there's so many factors that we have identified, including that previous life that they may have had with when they were a young horse, and there could be plus or minus trauma there, and the environment that they've been living in, whether that supported their growth and development. And Tiffanie, I think I just really appreciate all your support of Sen, because you do, as I've said before, speak our language with this whole holistic view of horse health and management. And I think when we look at the landscape today to when Sen came in over 10 years ago, I think we have made a good difference to the lives of horses in Australia, which I think will only continue with that awareness and with the work you do, because you've got a lot of followers on social media that you do project a really good message, and sometimes you need to set people straight or in a softer way to really think about and stir some emotional thinking about their horse. And I think we should wrap it up and really tie this all back in, and I'll just get your thoughts of your vision and your mission with horsemanship going into the future, and where can our listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, I think I'm really passionate about helping owners be the best mentors they can to their horses. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram under the Horse Translator, THT Horsemanship. Yeah, you can get in contact with me there.
Yeah, I'll put the links in the show notes. And do you have any upcoming clinics or online resources?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of online courses that are available. So I've got my Groundwork Fundamentals and Trouble-Free Trail Loading. I've got a few more coming up. There's always other things coming up. So if you look on my socials, I normally pop up there when clinics are coming up and so on and so forth. But you can also contact me if you were interested in sending a horse out for spelling or education.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all your insights and experience with horses. I'm just blown away that I get to meet people like you, even just over the phone, in terms of something that Peter and I were very passionate about way back in the day, that we can align our theory with other like-minded horse owners and trainers around Australia. And making this podcast has been amazing to connect with everyone, because we never thought when we first started the podcast it would grow to 141 episodes. Now it's probably close to 120,000 listens in total. It's just like a pinch me moment, but it's so worth it in terms of what impact it's going to have for horses. And this is where we both center our lives around. We want what's best for the horse and the way it can support their bodies, to then what we get out of our horses and what they get out of us. And they are such a fascinating animal, and I think I'm grateful to share this time with you and have a good talk about them.
Yeah, no, it's been absolutely amazing. And yeah, you're right. It's amazing what a vehicle the horse can be for change and development. Another thing that's been really handy has been when clients are coming to and from my property, they could be travelling a few hours at a time to get to me, because a lot of horses can travel and their owners travel from quite a distance to come to my centre. Is a lot of them will listen to the podcast you guys have available, and it's such a resource that's just so invaluable to owners. You know, what other place can they get so much information so accessible, and especially, you know, they can turn it on in the car as they're driving and they can listen to it. What also helps me out on my end to make sure that when the horses do go home, they're getting supported in the same way that they have been at my place, but also to just have so much more information around feeding, because it's such a wishy-washy topic and it's not something that has been accessible enough maybe for some people. And I just think the podcasts are fantastic, and I know my clients have really, really enjoyed them.
Thanks so much for that feedback. And yeah, it keeps us motivated to continue them. And obviously, I think the aim for each podcast is to give our listeners something that they have never really thought about their horse, or some information to take back to apply. And I think that's what we've done as well again on this podcast. So thanks again, Tiffanie.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So this about wraps that up. Is there any final words, Tiffanie, if you want to share?
I guess if anything, you know, if I could tell my younger self, and also if I could help someone else sort of young wanting to get into horses or into the industry, you know, any advice I could give them, it would be to do work that is meaningful from a place of wanting to help the horse and starting small and letting the horse reflect the rest.
No, that's fantastic advice, Tiffanie. I totally agree with that. And if you guys would like to connect with Tiffanie, feel free to reach out on our social medias. Also, we do have a Send Users group, which is 8 years young this week, and it's a hive of activity where horse owners and clients, they share their Send success, but also ask some questions that they need to really get to the bottom of or get another opinion of. But then also, if you are a first-time listener, we do have another 140 episodes you'd like to listen to in our back catalogue here. If you need some diet advice, feel free to reach out to Peter and I in the office. We've got a number, and also via email or social media. But it's been very enjoyable, Tiffanie, to spend the last hour with you, and hopefully we've given our listeners a good insight into how a horse can thrive through proper groundwork, wellness and nutrition. And yeah, thanks again, Tiff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.